I recently read about the latest enriching example of intercultural exchange in Germany, this time in Cologne, where the German police had to storm a pharmacy in the city's main train station to free a woman who had been taken hostage by a Syrian man for 2 hours. Prior to this, the man, who is allegedly an Islamic State sympathizer, lit a Molotov cocktail inside the station McDonald's restaurant, injuring a 14-year-old girl, and the teenager was taken to hospital with burns along with another woman who was treated for smoke inhalation. 3 separate women injured in the same train station and city made infamous almost 3 years ago after the mass sexual assault upon German women by the very same migrants that had forced their way into Europe and made their way across the continent and a dozen nations to make it to the richer welfare states of Northern Europe. The mass defilement of German women was of course explained away as an intercultural misunderstanding, and thus flowers were offered to migrants across the city by other German women. While there are many that celebrate the population replacement currently going on in Germany and around the entire Western world, there are those that do not, and a growing and significant number of people in Germany are pushing back against what many have dubbed the Kalergi plan, and all will be explained in the next few minutes. This video is kindly sponsored by Vikings. If you liked RTS games of yesteryear, my favorite was 0 Hour, you'll enjoy Vikings with its amazing graphics and playability. With over 20 million online players, the game, combat, and factions are constantly changing and evolving. Guys, support my channel by downloading Vikings for free. Links are in the description, and get a special bonus of 200 gold coins and a protective shield, and find me there as Hato Kuro. So go on, download Vikings now. It's been more than 2.5 years since German women crowded train stations in cities like Cologne with placards and squeals of refugees welcome, and they have become places where hostage-taking and mass sexual assault are becoming normalized as just part and parcel of living in an enriched German city. Since the great deluge of migrants at the end of 2015 and into 2016, terror attacks involving trucks of peace, the steep rise in violent crime, and, most seriously, rape, along with other socially negative consequences, are on the rise in what was this well-meaning but hopelessly deluded and naive country, where many believe that if they replace themselves, their culture, and their way of life, somehow this will make up for the actions of the Nazi Party in World War II. But there are many that do not, and this disgruntlement has seen not only the rise of the first meaningful party on the right in Germany, the Alternative for Deutschland, with polls rating it Germany's second most popular party, but more ominously, according to a poll commissioned by YouGov and reported by Die Welt, more than half of Germans would like to emigrate, as they have lost confidence in the chaotic government of Chancellor Angela Merkel, and in particular, they have stated that they would like to live in a country with a more stable political situation. And what's more, for many, the opinion on emigration has changed recently, with 29% saying they were less willing to do so just 2 years ago. And many, but of course not all, of these respondents would gladly turn their back on the country forever. Other reasons cited to wanting to emigrate was to live in a place that could provide better income as well as better weather. That there is now significant pushback forming at the grassroots level, as well as a significant portion of the people of Germany wishing to leave, as many believe that there is a deliberate plan by EU officials to inflict upon the native population of Germany, as well as the rest of the nations of the Union, group conditions of life that are calculated to bring about their physical and cultural destruction in whole or in part, so as to eliminate national differences and national characters. The destruction of national sovereignty is the ideological driving force behind the Brussels oligarchs as they plot to build their federal superstate, and it is very clear that they see mass, unending, and uncontrolled migration from Africa and the Middle East as the solution to demographically smother nations that wish to hold on to their national character. And this great replacement is happening not only in Germany, but across the continent. And this was the espoused dream of one Richard von Coudenhove-Kalergi, who was a pioneer of European integration and served as the founding president of the Pan-European Union for 49 years, which would be the preliminary ideological foundation of the European Union. It's very important to note that Coudenhove-Kalergi is not some shadowy figure, but a Japanese-Austrian nobleman who is recognized as the founder of the first popular movement for a united Europe. In his book, Practical Idealism, written in 1925, he describes the future of European racial composition with the following words. "The man of the future will be of mixed race. Today's races and classes will gradually disappear owing to the vanishing of space, time, and prejudice. The Eurasian Negroid race of the future, similar in its appearance to ancient Egyptians, will replace the diversity of peoples with a diversity of personalities." Kalergi's vision was aristocratic in nature. He argued that centuries of oppression had bred the Jews into being a superior people and what he called the leader nation of the future and Europe's spiritual nobility. It's important to note the context for Kalergi's ideas. Europe had recently torn itself apart during the First World War. Moreover, post-war competitive and begrudged hypernationalism was the eventual outcome. Kalergi himself thought in very and explicitly racial terms. He was a nobleman married to a Jewess with ancestry from opposite ends of Eurasia. Kalergi's personal life was a perfect reflection of his pacifist, cosmopolitan, and Judeo-philic aspects of his politics. His work to eliminate the nation-states of Europe as well as introduce people from outside of the continent to help dismantle the diversity of European ethnicities, nations, and cultures is well documented and not disputed in any way, shape, or form from either end of the political spectrum. Indeed, his ideas would later form the bedrock on which the European Union would be built, right down to its national anthem, Beethoven's Ode to Joy, which was his idea, along with Europe Day in May, also his idea. In fact, in 2010, German Chancellor Angela Merkel was given the European Award by the European Society Coudenhove-Kalergi. The prize is awarded every 2 years for extraordinary merit in the European integration process. Note that this was more than 5 years prior to her call for all of the world to come to Europe and live on state handouts, which has been heeded by millions. She additionally is a counselor of this foundation, as is, you guessed it, Jean-Claude Juncker, the current EU Commission President and one of the biggest ideological proponents of Coudenhove-Kalergi's vision of a deracinated Europe. According to his biography, Kalergi received help from Baron Louis de Rothschild, who put him in touch with many of his banking friends, including Max Warburg. Warburg then financially supported Kalergi with considerable funds to help him form his European movement, and he remained sincerely interested in the movement for the remainder of his life. And this movement has called for not only the destruction of the peoples of Europe and their nations via deliberate ethnocide, but that it should be realized via enforced mass migration to create an undifferentiated homogeneous mass of serfs to be dominated by a wealthy self-electing elite. Does any of this sound familiar to you? Whether or not the Coudenhove-Kalergi plan has been codified into official policy using his name, the spirit of his ideas entrusted to the foundations he headed is without question taking place not only in Germany and Europe, but also in North America, Australia, and New Zealand. It cannot be by accident that all Western nations simultaneously have chosen to replace their populations and espouse the same talking points when anyone notices the drastic changes that are taking place as you change one group of people and their culture out with another. And while the naive, the deluded, as well as those on the extreme left and their Marxist ilk, an ideology that has presided over the deaths of more human beings than any other ideology, may be celebrating Kalergi, his plans, and the eventual outcome, well, they truly do not understand, because he who proposed the destruction of the European peoples was no fan of communism. In fact, in a May 1933 interview, Kalergi expressed his full support for Italian fascism and suggested that a federal Europe could be established on the fascist model. Kalergi argued that the fascist constitution's blend of aristocratic and democratic elements made it a suitable model for a European federation. Moreover, he praised fascism for, unlike either the bourgeois democracies or Bolshevism, seeking to emancipate politics from economics. The spiritual grandfather of the European Union also wrote that his pan-European movement was neutral between democracy and fascism, and that governments should be judged by their position concerning the European idea and not from the perspective of their domestic politics. In later years, after the defeat of the Axis powers, Kalergi ultimately threw in his lot with parliamentary democracy. However, his ultimate preferences were always for an aristocratic globalism. While official remembrance, as well as those that receive awards in his name, like Chancellor Merkel, prefer to omit this fact, the reality is that many, like Kalergi, that saw utility in fascism were imbued with a pan-European ethos. While many of Kalergi's practical proposals for a united Europe were not without merit, arguing for an enormous Swiss-style confederation characterized by local government, a rotating presidency, and a federal army and foreign policy, the only way for this to happen would mean for the abolition of Europe and all of her distinctive languages, cultures, and nations. While the total destruction of the Western world, its culture and nations, is the dream of the rabid left and their Marxist ideology, it would seem that Angela Merkel, the Koldenhove-Kalergi European Award laureate, may have pushed too hard and too fast. The tectonic rumblings of nationalism can be felt continent-wide, and those not wanting to live as a serf or have their nations used as experiments in globalization picks up steam. History has shown, from the Ottoman Empire to Yugoslavia, forcing disparate people to live in the same space rarely ends well. There is a reason why more than half of all Germans want to leave the promised utopia that lies just over the multicultural rainbow, and it's the same reason why the alternative for Deutschland is growing exponentially. Germans have no other home than Germany. Italians have no other home than Italy. Europeans have no other home than Europe. And as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, Europe is for the Europeans. He's a pretty wise man. I wonder why nobody is listening to him now. If you like this video, please consider subscribing. Also, remember to support this channel by downloading Vikings. Links are in the description. See you next time.